This is a great topic. I love it because life science, you pretty much have to customize it to whatever the project is or process that they're going to do. Because there's a
Yeah.
big difference between building like something for small molecule versus, is
Yeah. Yeah. So construction alone is 102 pages. Um, eight co-locations though, right? So it's a data center. It's a right, and it's you have an admin plus eight colos, and it's just rinse and repeat. And that they've done it so many times that they go, we know the trades that we want to see in here. Um, I mean, you should have seen the WBS. It's like level 6-ish. It takes you down to the room, and then it breaks up the room by the trades and says, you need to double check to make sure that if there's a trade in here, you're adding activity, which I'm not going to lie, I kind of appreciate. It goes a long way.
I mean, that does help significantly. Uh, from my perspective, it's not just that, I guess, McDonald's style of planning where you're very cookie cutter, the shape of the building, what's going to be in the building, the utilities. I mean, it's very prescriptive in that sense for data centers, at least. But for other industries, it's completely, wild. I've
Sure.
seen everything under the sun.
But I guess in terms of the schedule that is not used is kind of where we're driving towards. I did have a conversation with the GC about this. So, the big takeaway for me, this is all I've been working on for the past couple of weeks, is putting together this baseline. And the takeaway for me is uh, on the general contractor side, it's less is more, right? It's less detail. Um, which is a strategy, right? It's not a bad thing or a good thing. It is just a strategy of how they want to manage the project. So if it's, the spec is saying we want a level 4 schedule, that's a pretty detailed schedule. Uh,
Yeah, once you get
and I
past three,
think,
it's
and
really,
honestly, with a lot of general contractors and trade partners that haven't been exposed to scheduling, let's say, that haven't really dug deep in that or are used to working with a scheduler that is more of like a data entry person, then they don't understand. And I don't want to use it in a derogatory tone. Then they may not have experienced kind of the rigor that goes into putting a baseline schedule and what the client is technically expecting. They want you to think about the work, not put in these big bars and then go, all right, but the week of, we're going to start playing the work. They want you kind of to be massaging this as you're going, which again, I don't necessarily dislike. But how do we make it workable is the question, right? And I think a lot of it goes back to, sorry, I'm a little pumped up since we just hit submit. Um, a lot of it probably ties back to just training and expectations. Um, like we built one co-location because that was kind of the template and that was already 50 pages. So from that, you should have extrapolated, hey, this is going to be a 200 some page schedule. And then the question was, how do we manage that moving forward? How do we make this usable? I know we're trying to hit on, hey, you submit a schedule that's not usable. How do you make it usable? Is basically, I think, one, let's just do some general training. This is what we're going to do week over week to manage the schedule, right? We embed someone with your team. We're going to, we'll put together our SOPs, processes, and procedures. This is what updating looks like. This is the reporting you should expect. This is how we make it efficient so nothing slips. Um, I mean, we're both data people. So I think I don't want to say the more the better. And this was kind of the conversation I had on the phone was essentially, we don't put activities in just to put activities in. It's really, you know, each trade needs to be represented, right? So above ceiling, you know better than anyone, above ceiling in a life science is
yeah,
more than just your typical MEP. It's everything you can think of.
yeah. I mean, you get process gases, process utilities in general, just running through there. Then you have all your data, just to control everything within that space below, but also the space above has its own data that's a separate whole pathway that goes to different systems. I mean, we have multiple management systems within a building, integrating all of that into a plan and figuring out how all those links are going to work out and timing everything to make sure everything's in place time that everything downstream needs to be. And I mean, in life science, here I see the big difference in life science is they have to get to operations portion. And that portion is not the same for every company. You'll see some where, you're going right into more of a pilot plant where you're starting to get batches come up to create your process. And then you have others, they already have a process that they intend to use in the facility. They just need to transfer the information in and confirm that it matches the other facilities to make it. So it's really like kind of, it could go one way or the other. The level of effort you need to go to get that building stood up and operational in the back end of your plan. And if you don't know that up front, it's very difficult to kind of plan where you need to be when you hand that over. And those handoffs are critical. It affects business and money.
And on the life science side too, you probably have another layer that you need to add in where, the construction folks, have seen a schedule, right? We're talking about scheduling today. They've all seen a schedule. You then have an operational readiness team that may or may not have ever been involved in the scheduling, or the scheduling that they have been involved with, tying back to our previous point, just doesn't go under the rigor that we're probably used to. Um, I think the days of Microsoft project schedules are probably going away a little bit. The days of just Excel schedules are going away a little bit. If you're, think of life science with operational readiness, you need even an end-to-end schedule. You don't want to make it cumbersome, but you got to be able to tell the whole story, so people understand the project and still make it usable though.
Yeah, that's actually my favorite part. A schedule is just a storybook essentially of what
Mhm.
your intentions are, how you plan on getting there. It's like Little Red Riding Hood going through the woods. The whole pathway she's taking, she's getting to grandma's at the end. That's the whole path, and at the beginning of your plan, you don't always have that information in life science. So you do end up putting a lot of placeholders. So that's why a lot of trust the information. Like, was that a placeholder or is that final? So if you're not communicating, you're not telling your staff or your client that this is our intent, not just this was our thought. It may not or may happen. And in
Sure.
life science, they change midstream. I mean, we've been on a project, they changed the process
Mhm.
and that was a whole redesign of the facility. And that changed the whole, even the leveling up above grid, everything changed the way that they needed to put in valves and what those valves look like. And then there's the maintenance of everything above grid. So they have walkable ceilings. And then you have to think about when you're building, you don't want to put things in too soon because just the people walking across the field put the next phase in could damage things that were in place. And we saw that on a project where people were walking and hitting lines, breaking, what was it, a fire sprinkler that they had that they just pumped. And sometimes it's
Mhm.
just simple error. But because it's so tight in life science, you got to really allow that time for trades to get in and get out of each other's way and lay out things in a way that makes sense buildability wise. But yeah, we got to go up to bottom, but sometimes there's things that have to be done before you can go to the next level because you can't get access to it later. And
Absolutely. Why the schedule you're submitted isn't the schedule you're running. I mean, I love this. And this is so, just the title that, let's do this first. Let's introduce I've been toying around with this name. It's either Pedro the producer or producer Pedro. I don't know which one is better. Um, I'm probably leading toward Pedro the producer. Um, and he prompts us and gives us some really good topics to talk about. And the topic he gave us is the schedule nobody reads. And I love that. And I think, again, this kind of ties back into um, it's probably twofold. It's the skill set of the planner or scheduler that you're used to. Um, and we run into this a lot. Let's just do this once first for the first part. So um, historically, been doing this for 20 years. Typically, when you bump into a schedule that nobody uses or reads on a project, means that this is typical on the general contractor side, that they have not been, again, exposed to a project controls person that has the wherewithal to understand not only just the software, right, P6, but construction as well, and can navigate a construction project, talk it intelligently about the construction project. I've mentioned this previously on our conversations. They won't know the depth of knowledge that's a superintendent's going to have, but the expectation at a minimum should be, hey, we're talking about concrete. I have to at least know about concrete and what goes into concrete. Form, rebar, pour, embeds, sleeves, everything that's involved in that scope of work. So typically, what I see when you walk into a new client and they go, all right, here's your activities, get them in the schedule. I actually just ran into this the other day. It's pause. Let's talk about this project. How are we physically getting to this? What is your site logistics, right? If we start doing, this is actually kind of what we talked about. If we're doing this deep underground trench first, is this going to cut off your site access? How is this going to impact your project? So I think, really a big component of the schedule that nobody uses is just a historical, they just haven't had a good experience with a project's control scheduler. I like to think that our team does it a little bit better. I know everyone has their challenges. They can be rushed and there's always issues, but what do you think?
I mean, personally, I see our team personally, I think, is doing a fantastic job of growing to a buildability scale on our scheduling. So they're actually doing their due diligence when they build the schedule, and they're asking those questions. They're building workflows that work, and they're identifying
Yes.
that impact points earlier, because that's really what helps make good decisions. And I mean, one of my projects right now, we just had an issue with laydowns. They're like, well, are we laying our equipment down, and where do our tools go? And as we go through your tact plan, where exactly do we set up our equipment and our tools? Because if we're moving constantly over 3 days, we can't be running around trying to find things. And that brings up deliveries, access, how you get into who takes priority, how much storage space we allow each trade, how much laydown space, and what the approach ability is. Like our HVAC team is, the plan is to do long strays and then lift them all up at once as opposed to doing short segments. That's a time savings for our team. However, on the other end, it does impact other trades' abilities to utilize a lot of square footage on the floor. But in the end game, it's like, if you want to get things up clean, out of the way, and then you get large swaths out of the way, and you're able to just focus on the little points in between. And then it comes into how much density of work is in each area. If
Hmm.
one room is like a 5 by 5 room and you have 9 trades in there at the same time, that's not going to work. So you have to learn how to upload your plan to allow each trade sufficient time to get the critical activities that they need to do in a timely manner, but also allow for any, issues that may occur in the fields. Like we've seen before, things happen, weather. Weather's a big, it always takes schedules. Like you can't plan for ice on the roof or 4 feet of snow. It's just the world we live in,
Sure.
but you have to be able to recoup time. And that's a big portion of what we do is it's not just planning the work, it's actually planning the time. And the time is what really matters, because that's where like value comes in. Because if you take way too long, you're spending way too much money on people. And if you take too short, you're going to get a lot of money, but you may not do the job properly. So it's kind of
Sure.
balancing the two of you.
Well, here, let's, why don't you answer his question directly? Um, what is one thing, right? If you have a schedule that is not being used, um, what is one thing that you think can kind of shift someone's paradigm on scheduling or kind of move them in the right direction?
A lot of times it's just educating the purpose of what our project controls are, how we interact and how we actually utilize the schedule. And explaining like, listen, my job is to make everybody on this site look good. If you don't look good, we all look bad. And if you're the only one that looks good, that's great for you, but our team doesn't look good. We need to make sure everybody's on the same page, following that pathway, understanding how we get from A to B and what steps need to be taken at what time. And in life science specifically, there's a lot of outliers. There's a lot, you have a lot of government agencies that come in And depending on where that drug is going to be marketed, different agencies factor into how that buildability goes. Every country has its own standards, but in the US specifically, we have to adhere to whatever market we're selling in. So we have to make sure if we're selling in Japan, we have to hit the Japan Ministry of Health. If we're selling in Australia, we have a different ministry that we have to go to. If we're selling in Europe, they have their whole separate, you know, manufacturing experience. Their standards are different. Some are loose, a lot stricter on certain aspects, like humidity control is a big one where you don't think of it as a big deal. But if a product has limited humidity specifications, now you have some outline that has to be adhered to. And if your team doesn't understand that we need to keep the building in a level of control for downstream processes to start earlier, you're never going to achieve your goal. I hope
Sure.
that was direct.
He'll tell us. Um, here's one I want to answer, and let me just tee it up. So one of the questions posed to us is, is this a contractor problem? Is this an owner problem? Is this a subcontractor problem? Is this the tool that we're using problem? I honestly don't think it's any of those. I think it is your project controls individual. I think there's a certain minimum required knowledge base that you absolutely need to have to be working on a lot of these projects. Um,
Absolutely.
Again, just being able to ask the right questions at the right time, being confident enough to stick your hand up in meetings and just ask those questions, I think goes further than, just staying quiet. So I don't think it's anyone else. There could be this education gap, but again, I think that falls back on that project trolls individuals. They should come on to that job site and say, here's the process, or, candidly, do you guys have a process? Review it. How does it look? Does it fit in? Does it meet your at least bare minimum requirements? And if it does, it elevate those standards. Again, a lot of project controls is just communication, and historically, what we see when there is an issue on a project, specifically with project controls, it's that communication has broken down. Right? You have a scheduler that is sitting in the corner, heads down, just crunching away inside of a scheduling software, as opposed to getting out in front of people and then just being honest about it. Hey, I'm trying to put in this sequence of work. Can you sit with me and work on it? I don't understand how to get in. Or, I'm looking at this longest path and it doesn't seem right. Or, hey, this longest path is showing us, we're going to be 10 days late. Let's sit down and review it. My best advice to anyone, if they have a schedule that is not being used, it's to over communicate. It's really to get out in front of it, probably daily, saying, hey, here's what I'm working on today. And at the end of the day, say, here's what I closed out today. Does this look accurate? And just kind of staying ahead of this gap of the schedule not being used.
Yeah, I could not agree more with that. I
Hmm.
mean, it's, I'm not saying it's pretty straightforward, but I mean, when you see people planning in a silo, that's when you
Hmm.
usually find the biggest problems because when they're not communicating, the schedule's not communicating. And if the schedule's not communicating over to the team, how does the team know what they're supposed to be doing today?
Yep.
Or how do they know where they are within the project even? And that's why those big bars really, it does affect the way that you plot out your work. And, we see all these other tools that people are trying to use in the field, but I always go back to P6. I find it's the most accurate tool you can actually use to build out a plan. There's a lot of other tools you can build smaller schedules that work and incorporate in. But if you don't use all the functionality of that other tool, your P6 is wasted
Hmm.
or that tool is wasted. So, I mean, it's the level of effort you put into the work and also that communication with, if you're not discussing why these are impacts or why these are constrained or why these are fast tracked or expedited, you're not going to achieve what you really want in the final portion of your plan.
Yeah, absolutely. And then, I think it's really cool. I think one of the, really special moments on a project, if you're full time on site or if you're working on a portfolio of projects, it's really exciting when the schedule is clicking with the field, it's clicking with the owner, everyone's bought into the schedule, it is a really good feeling when that happens because, everyone has confidence and trust in the project. You're giving out accurate information. Um, so man, I encourage everyone, again, if you feel like your schedule's not being used, um, it's most likely communication issue. It's less a skill issue, and it's most likely communicate more frequently, meet with more people, um, and just kind of get out in front of this issue of the schedule is not being used as a tool to build your project.
Yeah, don't be afraid to ask questions. That's the biggest thing. People usually they don't want to look stupid in a room full of people because they asked, "How long does it take to cure concrete?" Well, honestly, that's a valid question because depending on how thick it is, how big the surface area is, weather conditions, that factors into how that cures. What the final cure is gonna look like is concrete, is it gonna be something external, internal? It all matters, like, based off of what you're doing, and if you don't ask the question, you might know how to put concrete and how to cure it, but if you don't know what the intention of that concrete is, you may not know why they're doing things in a specific manner,
Sure,
you know?
absolutely.
One, two.